Good morning, guys. Obviously, I'm not there today. So I promised you, well, I told you that we would still have, or we would be having the quiz test on Wednesday. We're going to stick to that. We're just going to go through some things real quick, and then you can have the second half of class to review for the quiz tomorrow. If you could just take out your vocab sheets so we can wrap up some of those things that may not be in the textbook. You also want to have out the chapter 17, section 4 and 5 note sheet, the one that has the progressive laws down the middle, and then the issue that you filled in on the left, and the what it did on the right. I just want to wrap up some informational stuff for you, and then give you the rest of the time in class to review. And I'll tell you a little bit about what the makeup of the test, kind of quiz test, is going to look like on Wednesday, tomorrow. As I was alluding to in third period, I didn't quite get to it in fourth period today. 1900 is the election of 1900 is a unique election for the progressives, for the progressive movement, because the progressive movement was showing signs of being bipartisan. That is, there were some Democratic progressives and there were some Republican progressives. And if I were in class today, I would say, who have you read about that is the most notable Republican progressive? And hopefully you would all know that the answer is Teddy Roosevelt. And so the problem with Teddy Roosevelt for the Republicans is that the mainstream Republican Party, the power base of the Republican Party, was not progressive. And so they decided in 1900 that they were going to run their incumbent, William McKinley, for president, but they had this problem of Teddy Roosevelt, because he was becoming a popular politician in New York as the governor, as a progressive governor. And so the Republican Party bosses decided to hide Teddy Roosevelt. They thought they could accomplish a couple of things. They could compete against growing reform movements that were starting to take shape in the Republican Party, and they could keep Teddy Roosevelt and his progressivism from kind of becoming a mainstream within their political party. Simple solution. You throw him in the vice presidency, he disappears for 4 years, and 4 years later, you hope that you eliminated his power. Well, here's the results of the election of 1900. You can see that the Democratic Party still holds sway in the South, the solid South, and the Republicans are capturing the population centers, the urban centers in the Northeast, the industrial Northeast, and now this growing urban area in the Midwest, in addition the West, the far West. This is enough for them to garner a victory. You can see that the popular vote is, it's pretty close, but the electoral vote isn't all that close. So they accomplished what they wanted to. However, the president, William McKinley, is assassinated in 1901, and the fact that they stuck Teddy Roosevelt in the vice presidency to try to hide this Republican progressive actually promotes him. He becomes president of the United States, and you can just imagine what the Republican bosses were thinking when that happened. So the first national progressive movement really is going to come under Teddy Roosevelt, and some things that you have in your vocab sheet. If you look at the second side, under the segregation stretch of vocab words, so we did the initiative, referendum, recall yesterday. Suffrage, you should be able to get out of your textbook. We talked about Plessy versus Ferguson, we talked about lynching, and we talked about segregation. Then underneath there, you have this run of kind of Teddy Roosevelt terms, from trust busting down through conservationism. You should be able to get most of those out of your textbook. But the idea of Teddy Roosevelt's progressivism is focused on, identifying businesses that were, not good for the American capital system. What he identifies as bad monopolies or bad big business. In 1904, he's going to run for president in his own right, and then he has this ongoing administration battle over conservation versus preservation. And conservationism is something you should have gotten out of your reading. If not, you should go back and look at that. The thing that I want to focus on with Teddy Roosevelt is how he is going to allow for the reemergence of the Democratic Party in 1912. Teddy Roosevelt has a nice run as a very moderate progressive. As far as Republicans were concerned, he was very radical, but as far as progressives were concerned, he was pretty moderate. But he's a Republican progressive, very popular, immensely popular with the American people. And so one thing that he promised, and I was alluding to this before, one thing that he promised in 1904 was that he was going to run for president and then he was done, that he wouldn't run for another term after that. And it was pretty quick after he became president that he regretted that promise. But he lives up to it. In 1908, he doesn't run. He actually goes off. He goes hunting in Africa. He disappears for a while, kind of lives the cowboy lifestyle. But he doesn't like what's happening at home under the presidency of his successor, hand-picked successor, William Howard Taft. And so when he comes back in 1912, he decides to challenge Taft for the Republican nomination. He wants to be president again. This time, however, the Republican Party didn't want Teddy Roosevelt back. They were in the process of redefining themselves the way that they wanted to be without Teddy Roosevelt. And so they support Taft, and so it's Taft versus Roosevelt. The progressives in the Republican Party support Roosevelt. And so here's what happens. It's what I would talk about in class if I were there. What I would really focus on is this is going to be something that is going to be a recurring theme in the 20th century. And so maybe get this down in your notes over here, and we can talk about it again later. But whenever there is a rift or a split, and maybe whoever's subbing can help, you can pause this, or if you have questions about this, to answer those. But when in the 20th century, whenever there's a split in the power of one of the major political parties, the biggest beneficiary is the other political party. So in this case, you have William Howard Taft, and the old guard Republicans are supporting him. And then you have Teddy Roosevelt, a former president, very popular president, who's challenging him for the Republican nomination. You have the Republicans kind of fighting with one another over who they want. If the Democrats can just show strength behind one person, they look stronger, they look more stable. And so what ends up happening in the Republican convention is Teddy Roosevelt's supporters are angry because Taft gets the nomination. And Teddy Roosevelt and his supporters, they walk out of the convention. They start their own third party, which you have here. We talked about charismatic yesterday. The Bull Moose Party is this third party, this progressive Republican Party that Teddy Roosevelt's going to actually run for president on that ticket in 1912. And the fact that the Republican Party is split now, literally split, between two parties, makes the Democratic Party's position even stronger. So it's a golden opportunity. And the Democratic Party would benefit from this schism, this break in the Republican Party. First of all, they don't run William Jennings Bryan again. They choose kind of a middle-of-the-road progressive. He's a Southerner, so it plays to their solid base in the South. And he's not somebody who's connected to the Washington bureaucracy. So he's not viewed as kind of old guard, machine politics. And his name is Woodrow Wilson. And here are the results. Let me see if I can get it real quick. Here are just the electoral results from 1912. And if you look at just the electoral votes, it looks like Woodrow Wilson mopped him up, right? And it also looks like Teddy Roosevelt had a pretty dramatic impact on this election. And in fact, it's kind of Taft who's keeping Roosevelt from being successful. When you look a little closer, though, at the popular vote, you can see that the popular vote is pretty close between the two Republican candidates, between Taft and Roosevelt, and then you have other minor candidates that are picking up some, and then you have Wilson who gets his fair share. But because if you project out, I'm reaching towards the map like you can see it, but if you project out those popular votes, to all of the different states that are even blue, you have Taft stealing votes from Roosevelt, or vice versa, Roosevelt stealing votes from Taft in all of these states. In all of these states that are blue, that may have cost one or the other the electoral votes to Wilson. So, it looks like an electoral landslide. But when you look at the situation, the fact that there was a third party had a pretty dramatic impact on the outcome of this election. Here is really what was up against each other in that election. the two different versions of progressivism: the mainstream Democratic Party's progressivism and the mainstream Republican Party's progressivism. So you have Teddy Roosevelt's new nationalism. He believed in conservation. He believed in reclaiming lands. He believed in, and it encompassed like an environmentalist approach to progressivism. And then he believed in economic fairness, not leveling of the playing field, but just fairness. He offered what he called a square deal to the American people, where he was going to, some trusts, he believed some monopolies, some business monopolies were good for the country, and they were going to be allowed to thrive and survive. Others were being manipulative, and he was going to use his powers as president to break them up. He viewed himself as being impartial. Whereas Wilson, we're going to see his program which is called New Freedom. There's going to be a lot more direct intervention. You should have, on the note sheet, you should have the Federal Reserve Act filled in. The issue there is the overall health of the American economy and the strength of the government's role in the economy. The federal regulation of economic policy comes through the Federal Reserve Act. In Wilson's opinion, there are no good trusts. That any monopoly, is going to be a detriment to the consumer, and it's going to be a detriment to the overall health of the American economy. Wilson believes largely in federal regulation. He approaches it, instead of impartially, he believes in a compassionate liberalism, where he sets the stage for even more movement toward this welfare state, is the best way of putting it, later in the 20th century. Woodrow Wilson is kind of the precursor to the modern liberal movement within the Democratic Party. So what I want you to do with the rest of the period, and maybe I'll figure it out later. What I want you to do with the rest of the period is I want you to review. You have quite a bit to review, because you have that last section in chapter 16, the notes from there, and all of the sections from chapter 17. And the way that this quiz is going to shape up is, or test is going to shape up, is there's not going to be any multiple choice. What you're going to have is you're going to have a matching section that's going to cover the vocabulary that we've gone over the last few days. And that vocabulary sheet is also going to be turned in for some credit tomorrow before the test starts, but you should hang on to it to review. Some of the ones that you may think we didn't go over, I didn't go over them on purpose because they're in the textbook. And this is something that you should be referencing while you're reading. You can find those on your own. So you'll have a matching section, which is going to ask you to match the vocabulary term with the correct identification, or maybe even example. From there will be a section on the origins of progressivism. So in essence, what is it that was happening that made the progressive movement seem necessary? So this is really those early sections in chapter 17. Then there will be a section where I'm going to give you some examples, and I'm going to ask you to carry it out. What's the problem? How is the problem exposed? And what's the solution? And there you should really reference these laws that I gave you as examples for chapter 17, sections 4 and 5. I don't think that I would stray too far from those issues in assessing you tomorrow. And then the last section on the test will cover this political reality that takes shape once progressivism gets to the national level. So what I mean by that is kind of carrying out national progressivism. So Teddy Roosevelt to Woodrow Wilson in a political sense. How do we get Teddy Roosevelt as this progressive president? What is his style of progressivism? And how do we then get Woodrow Wilson, and what's his style of progressivism? Something that I should mention, and you can include in your notes here, is that it is pretty it's a pretty significant moment that Woodrow Wilson is elected president, because he is a Southern Democrat, and he is the first Southern Democrat to be elected president since the Civil War. There had actually only been one Democratic president before Wilson since the Civil War, and that was Grover Cleveland, and he served 2 non-consecutive terms in the 1880s, and he's from Ohio, so he's not like a true blue Southern Democrat. Whereas Woodrow Wilson, He is a Virginia son of a Presbyterian minister. He is a Southern Democrat, and that is a pretty important stride not only for the Democratic Party. It's an important stride for Southern politics. Now, I guess it helps his legacy some that he's a progressive, but as you'll see as we move into more of the civil rights angle when we get into the 1920s, we will reflect a little bit on Woodrow Wilson and how he brings some of his Southern Democratic roots with him to the White House. Okay, so what I'd ask you to do now is the sub is going to provide for you. I would refer to them by name, but I'm not sure who it is. They will provide for you a review sheet that I've put together for you that is aimed at just keeping you focused on what it is that you need to get ready for tomorrow. You should review your vocabulary. You should review your reading note sheets. Okay, the test will be tomorrow. I'll post this will be posted on my website, so if you need to go back and look at this, you can, or the other two videos. Okay, sorry guys, I got a sick baby. I guess you can email me with questions. I'm not too sure how easily I'll be able to access my email during the day, but I could try. Study hard. See you guys tomorrow.